be declared out of rank on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
Justice? Is this justice? I'm hearing justice everywhere. We finally got justice. Or is this accountability? There's a difference. Let's talk about it. You're listening to Let's Chew the Gum. Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. We talk a lot about a lot of things in this show while we chew the gum, and just like every show, we always have
something for your mind, something for your mind, something for your mind,
정신을 집어넣으세요. 어떤 것이 필요합니까?
something for your
정신을 집어넣으세요.
mind,
정신을 집어넣으세요.
something for your
This council has no hesitation in proclaiming you all guilty. 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 Guilty.
guilty was indeed the word for April 20th, 2021. That's Derek Chauvin, the police officer that had his knee on the neck of George Floyd last summer, was found guilty on all charges. Is this justice, though? That's the question. Justice or accountability? At the outset, I said there is a difference. And rather than use my self-knowledge, let me turn to Merriam-Webster, this authority. To be just means to conform to a standard of correctness. Justice is the maintenance or administration of that standard. The maintenance or the administration of that standard. Now, accountable, some synonyms: answerable, responsible. Derek Chauvin was definitely responsible for the death of George Floyd, and he had to be answerable. And I know that there are many of us, many folks, including myself, that were hesitant about the outcome of this verdict. We've seen verdicts before in situations like this that were deplorable, where people were found innocent of obvious misconduct, obvious situations where there was murder or some harm done to an individual, even on camera. We can go back to the Rodney King verdict, which led to the LA riots. There are so many that we can look at. Someone said nothing's changed but the clearness of the camera. And in this case, the perpetrator was found guilty. And I know there are many folks that said it shouldn't even had to have been a trial because of the overwhelming video evidence. But we live in a country of laws where everyone has the right to due process. And I don't want to see that eroded, no matter how obvious the evidence is, because there have been many people where there wasn't evidence and trials were commenced without due process. So I don't want to go back to that. But again, justice or accountability. Well, again, accountable. He was accountable. He had to be answerable to his charges because he was responsible. So there definitely is accountability. Whether he accepts it, it's a different story. Accountability was placed upon him, made him accountable. Now, again, justice. Justice is the maintenance or administration of what is just. And I already said that justice conforming to a standard of correctness. We aren't there yet. This wasn't justice. This was a justice in that case, but we're talking about maintenance. Justice is not a single incident, and it cannot be proclaimed due to a single verdict. Justice is not an individual incident. It's the maintenance of what is just, the maintenance of correction, of what is correct. What is fair, what is moral, what is right. It's a continuation. That's why we have to continue to do our part, to be diligent to ensure that justice prevails, that justice exists, because it's ongoing, it's living. I've seen so many comments this past day or so on social media where folks saying just the same. One video where an elderly person watched the verdict and replied that they had never seen this before. This person must have been 90s at least. And to live that long and to be able to say in a situation like this that they had never seen that before, with all the injustices, with all the violence and misappropriation of laws and misapplication of laws, I should say, appropriation as well, just in general. They had never seen this before. Other folks broke down in tears because they were overwhelmed at the results, because they anticipated that this would not be a just situation. And I can't say that I blame them. I've seen enough of these myself where just had folks shaking their head. Some other reactions I saw were a gentleman who expressed that he could breathe now, and not in the way that we saw George Floyd depart this body, but he could breathe differently because his chest had been so tight. And he made the reference of a collective tightness of folks' chest at the thought of the possibility that this would not be a just situation, because they had witnessed previous situations where justice was not served, and nor was there accountability. And so for him, I imagine, because I have a similar mindset, but I imagine that it was trauma. A lot of folks are walking around with trauma, whether it is trauma from their own interactions in these situations, or those of family or distant relatives, or just the collective disbelief in previous verdicts or previous situations involving a lack of justice. It's been traumatic, just the thought of it. It was trauma, and that sparked those uprisings after the Rodney King verdict in '92. That was just trauma. People couldn't believe it, and they became overwhelmed. I was there. I remember the day like it was yesterday. I remember the thickness in the air, the tension in the air over the pending verdict. And I remember the feeling, it was almost palpable once the verdict was read in the Rodney King trial I'm talking about right now. When that verdict was read, I remember immediately walking outside. I was in South Central LA, and I remember walking outside, and just, you could feel the angst and the trauma of the people. And as I documented what was happening in the city and driving around town through different parts of South Los Angeles, I could see the trauma being released. I would like to believe that with this Chauvin trial, that the verdict that was put forth, I would like to believe that it was done because it was the right thing to do, because this officer was guilty. I would like to believe that that's the reason that the verdict came down, and not, as some folks talked about, it being a verdict put down because they didn't want riots, because they didn't want situations to occur that would be costly to more lives. I like to think that. I like to think that we're on the precipice of having a just society. I like to think that this is not an issue of race. I like to think that. I like to think that no matter what race or ethnic group that you belong to, that you see the inhumanity in this. I'm not naive to believe that there are folks that celebrated the death of George Floyd, capitalized on the death of George Floyd. But I like to believe in basic human decency, that the vast majority of folks see that this is a issue of humanity, not race. An issue of humanity, not race. Because in any situation, the people involved, the victim and the perpetrator, could have been different races, different ages, different genders. But what we saw last summer on camera was an issue and a violation of human rights. That should be something that everyone can agree upon. If you want to be safe in your community, if you want to be living in a just society, you have to respect the rights of others. You cannot have a heart full of hate. You cannot perpetrate hateful acts upon others and expect that things are going to be peachy keen for you. Life is going to be good for you. In a just society, everyone matters. So it's a matter of humanity for me, and I hope we understand that. But again, this was just accountability on display. Let's work for justice. What organizations can you join that are focused on maintaining and administering justice in your community, within your small groups? How can you get together with others to ensure that these types of things don't happen, that we minimize these types of life-changing, life-ending altercations with law enforcement or in any other situation? What does that look like? Does that mean diverting resources from police departments and putting them into more of a community-based policing? Reserving our law enforcement for situations that are serious in nature? It's not an easy task. There's a lot to be considered. I was speaking with a deputy sheriff some time back. This was just after the George Floyd incident last summer, and I was speaking with him about there are many folks in the country calling for defunding the police department. and we were discussing what that looks like, what that means, and it had a different meaning for different folks. So you have to be really careful who you spoke to about that, and make sure what you meant by that, because for some, defunding the police meant no police departments at all. Okay, so we just trust criminal society. I don't know about that. No police at all. It'd be nice. It's a nice utopian ideology, but I don't know. I don't know if we're at a point where we could trust society that much. Now, in small communities, your own communities, by all means, you should be involved. You should get out there with your neighbors. You should know your community. You guys should get to know each other. You can police your own communities to ensure that you have a more harmonious living condition, right? You can police your communities to the point where you may not need police, right? Because you guys are doing that yourselves. That's great. Those funds that would normally go to policing and responding to situations in your neighborhood, that money may not be necessary. So that money could be reallocated somewhere else within the department. That you could look at that and say that that's defunding a certain segment of the police department. Perhaps police departments in your cities could implement different programs to where those fundings are going to community groups to help them. But as we talked about that conversation with Deputy Jones, some things began to make a lot more sense as to why many folks are calling for not defunding the police. I'm going to talk about that as soon as we come back from the break. You're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. Feel free to email us at letschewthegum@gmail.com if you'd like to be a guest on the show or have show topic ideas, or you can also send your comments and requests to that email as well. You can follow us here where you're listening or anywhere else you receive podcasts. I'll be right back.
Mind. Something for your mind. Mind.
Please smile again.
Something for your mind.
무엇인가 정신에 집어넣으세요.
It's just 8 days away. The Instagrad 2020 year-end review documentary, still celebrating the class of 2020, is set to premiere mid-May on streaming platforms, but you can catch it early exclusively on all of Instagrad 2020 pages and platforms. Check it out May 1st.
Because you were Instagrad, you kept it pushing.
Guiltiness, rest on their conscience. Oh yeah.
Guiltiness indeed. Thank you for listening to our sponsors. Welcome back. We've been talking about the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial of guilty on all counts, and discussing whether it is justice, as many folks are shouting, or is it simply accountability? Is it simply accountability? And we earlier, talked about justice as being the maintenance or administration of what is just, the maintenance, the upkeep, the ongoing process of justness, right? And just being the idea of conforming to standards of correction. And so I established that it is my firm belief that this is not justice. Justice was served in this individual incident, but this was an incident of accountability, answerability, being answerable, being responsible, which Derek Chauvin was responsible for. And I imagine we can approach every individual court case as the results being one of accountability or not accountability, but with the idea that what is just and right can occur, and those are individual cases of justice. But the way people have been talking about justice is like an overarching or blanket over all of societal ills that we experience, all of the societal ills that we experience. And in this case, that's not justice, right? We have to maintain it. So again, how do we maintain that within our communities? Before the break, I had mentioned I was talking with an officer previously about the idea of defunding the police and the various definitions that people have for it, whether it's getting rid of the complete budgets to where there are no police officers present, to reallocating funding to various aspects of policing or community policing, different programs and training. And so the conversation I had with him, I think someone else in the meeting brought it up, but the conversation was around the idea of not having police go out for all calls in the neighborhood, because a lot of times the encounters that happen result in the unnecessary deaths of people like George.Floyd and so many others. So if we don't have police even getting involved in those situations, right, it lessens the opportunity for a mortal outcome, right, or an outcome that results in the death of or harm of someone. And so they were suggesting, for example, if it's a psychiatric checkup or health and wellness checkup in some situations, that police don't be involved. But the officer brought up a good point, and he said, the reason that police often go on those types of calls is because, you never know what the situation is at the home when you're dealing with someone that may be mentally and emotionally unstable. It may be not a good idea to send just a social worker who may be in harm. And that is a great point. I mean, it's definitely worth listening to and considering, right? How do we get around that? Because we want those folks who go out into the homes. Look, I'm a teacher. I do home visits sometimes. And, I've gone and told folks I was going to go to visit a student's home, and they were hell bent on warning me not to go. Like, have you seen, where the person lives or what the people that are there? And none of those things deterred me from doing that. But at the same time, not everyone is as comfortable as I may be in going into what potentially volatile situations to help someone. So that's definitely a consideration. So what is the response? What is the resolution? Perhaps again, increased training of officers, and I mean, officers receive quite a bit of training. I know for a fact there's lots of training, but it has to go beyond training. You can be trained to do something, but still be of your own mindset when it comes to the execution of performing what you were trained to do. And if you are not of the correct mental disposition, you may willfully neglect to do your job because maybe you don't value life as much as others. And that's why you hear the stories about certain groups or certain individuals committing heinous crimes and being escorted to Burger King because they were hungry, or gently placed into a car, versus others that pose no imminent danger at all, being killed on the scene, on the spot, because the value to life has not been the same. There was no justice there. So perhaps in these situations, maybe beyond training, we need to also look at the hiring practices. And then, those practices are, in some instances, have been terrible. For example, in Los Angeles, police officers were brought in specifically from southern portions of the United States that were experiencing Jim Crow, the inequitable access, distribution, application of laws, right, against to the detriment of black people for the most part. And so these people were brought in as police officers, recruits, and hired based upon the fact that they lived in the South with black people. They had experience of what they would say. They had experience with dealing with the black problem, right? But these were folks who were often white supremacists, either in deed or in philosophy. They had been in an environment where blacks were second-class citizens whose rights had not been recognized. And so they were brought in specifically because of their propensity of violence and aggression towards black people. Now, that being said, that was something that was replicated in many cities, this ideology. So if we're hiring people, when we know they have the propensity for violence against black folks, when we know that they have biases and whatnot towards any group, then that's a failure in the system right there. And someone needs to be accountable for that. That's a failure right there. So how can we expect any amount of training that is given to change their mind in terms of how they're going to apply that training, right? That training for them would be, beneficial for them when they are dealing with someone that they give preferential treatment to. But if they come in with hate, that training is not the answer. So we need accountability. And this is nothing new, right? It's like I'm tiring of talking about this subject as I'm talking about it because but for folks that haven't experienced this is nothing new. It is a very old story. But we can't stop there because what we've done hasn't worked. And when we know it was a good solution, we can't stop because it hasn't worked yet. And so if anything, I hope that, this situation is a catalyst for us to continue to work on those things that we know are possible solutions and remedies and not to give up on them. So, what's your solution? All right. A couple of questions today. Was it justice or accountability? That's up to you to decide. But what's your solution as we move forward? Just after and during the trial, there were still more people being killed in those same type of encounters. What do we do? I would like to challenge you to become the police in your community. And I don't mean police officers as in uniformed. I mean becoming involved in your community, not like this guy, this I don't even have his name, that was harassing a young black man. I don't know the state, maybe one of the Carolinas, Army enlisted person, I believe, sergeant, I believe, that was coming out of his home, questioning a young man about where do you live? This is our neighborhood. We don't want you. You're not supposed to know, that type of thing. Now, had that been a true situation, I have no problem with that type of policing. I want to know who's walking through my neighborhood, but not in that manner. That was egregious. That was wrong on every account. Let me not give any indication that I agree with what he did. What I'm saying is community policing of that nature in terms of knowing who's in your community. Apparently he didn't know his community well. Apparently he was biased in his approach. But just the idea of knowing your community. So, someone should know. There should have been a neighbor that knew. That guy should know, right? It can begin on your street. When we grew up, we had, block parties and things like that where people got together. Be careful, even with this vaccinated populations, it's still dangerous to catch and transmit COVID. But my point is we knew one another on the block. And folks on the next block knew one another and so on, right? So you knew when there was someone that didn't belong in the neighborhood. And even then you couldn't assume because you have visitors, but you still had some awareness. That type of community policing does not require violence against individuals. If it's determined that, your neighbors and yourselves determine there's a problem, then, you act. That's quite a bit different than policing that results in the death of individuals. We still have ways to go, obviously. I don't know if I even want to place a judgment value on this verdict, as to say, like, I'm pleased with the verdict. I mean, I am happy that, and I don't even know if happy is what I'm not happy that this situation had to occur. I would just say that I agree that he was guilty, and I agree that that's the verdict that should have been handed down. It doesn't emote happiness or joy for me. I don't feel like it's a celebration where I'm going to go and have a party and yell to the skies guilty and dance. And I mean, all those things are a little bit extra for me. But if that's what moves some folks, I definitely understand why they would. But for me, it's still a sad affair. What happened, if the verdict was supposed to happen, it should have happened. And I do agree with that. But it doesn't make me happy to know that we had to even get to that point. I just want to challenge you all to, again, become involved proactively. Don't wait for the problems to persist and then be reactive. Think about what you can do, because we all can do something to prevent these types of things from happening, to lessen the likelihood that these types of things will happen that happened to George Floyd and so many others. Really tired of having, somebody's name, that we have to say their name as the new mantra, or the new call to arms for the movements. But seriously, think about what you can do. Form community groups, partnerships with businesses and your local law enforcement to help each other. Become involved in law enforcement in your community. Propose at your city councils different methods by which the police actually patrol your communities. Establish these police and community councils to take, some semblance of control over your neighborhoods. You live there, right? There's a lot you can do to help, and I'll leave it at that. I hope that you have enjoyed this topic. This is Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. Feel free, as always, to email us. And thank you. Let me say thank you for all those that tune in from around the world. Continue to send your emails to letschewthegum@gmail.com. Again, for show suggestions, if you'd like to be a guest on the show, or to send your critiques and questions about topics that you've heard. You can, again, listen to this podcast here where you're listening, or any other platform where podcasts are made available. And if you find one where we're not, let me know. We'll get there. Thank you. As always, we have
something for your